Hey. So this is the start of my talk. I called it Learning, Communication and Culture. So sort of the phrase I use there, changing minds and increasing influence. But Sandra used a phrase yesterday which I really liked, which was increasing your bubble. Like this is the whole focus on that. And there's sort of some bits of information, some strategies that might help you along. So anyway, I'm Joe, recovered zombie. I'm a developer, craftsman, coach. I make things. I'm a teacher. I have a night job. I help organise the Extreme Tuesday Club. So come along there if you're doing this every fortnight in a pub. There's beers and we talk about software. I also work in a large bank, so which not a particularly good environment for craftsmanship, but I try anyway. So this is sort of trying to answer the question, what can this talk do for you? And so I'm sort of trying to give you some pointers, like some really big markers about what you can do to actually sort of expand your influence. I think this is a craftsmanship conference, I think, last I checked. I think you're all probably bought into the whole set of values and principles and practices, or at least you're learning to get better at those. But eventually, as you start doing this, you'll find you'll start to come against the edges of your bubble. So what do you do there? Like what strategies can you do to actually sort of try and expand that? And so we want to explore some. So I've split this talk into 3 different parts there. So first is just the story, which some of you, like depending on your experience, might recognise as something you've been through or not. But then we'll go into a few different sort of bits and pieces which might help you go forward. So let's sort of move on. So this is my story. It's a thing that happened to me. It's a thing I was involved with, and it's a thing I'm actually not proud of, but nevertheless, I tell anyway. So, of course, I think it's an important sort of thing to actually go through. So I was involved in a large, lean, agile transformation in a large bank. Now, it was actually quite interesting because I'd heard a lot of people say these things never work. And I'd sort of given a bit of a scoff and I thought, surely there must be some sort of thing. But let's see how it goes. And this is a fairly standard trajectory. So we have a large department, like there was about 400 people, I think. There was sort of 50, say, London-based. We had another 350 offshore in Poland and Romania, really, I think it was. So we had a sort of quite a large content around, a large group of people, which this size of a team doesn't really change quickly, but the business was really, really keen to actually sort of help level them up. They wanted to get some more sort of value out of what they were getting for these people. They wanted to actually have some more options in the future to get ahead. But at the same time, like we started talking to people, it was a low autonomy environment as well. Like the bank, this was a fairly controlling one, and different departments had different sort of ways of running, but this one wasn't great. Very high attrition. Like a few years back, a huge chunk of the team had just sort of upped and left. So what we had left wasn't really great. So in the sense that they weren't particularly sort of highly motivated to actually do things better. But so this is the sort of thing that you often walk into. There's a big vision. So wipe the slate clean. Let's give some power back. Like some of the senior sort of folks had actually read Turn the Ship Around, and like they were sort of understanding the whole value of leadership at all levels, and there was lots of discussions about the value of the technical practices, the craftsmanship approach, and really as well the planning and the ability to sort of agile planning and road mapping and stuff to actually sort of help us be lean and agile, but still sort of be able to do our long-term vision. So like there was some good sort of setup there, and we actually had at the start really cool people. Like there was a whole group of people, some smart people, some very senior people in the business and the on the technical side, which gave me a lot of hope because having been around the bank for a while, what we did see was that there's a lot of technical IT-driven initiatives to change things, to fix things. But as it gets to the edge of the bubble, and really the only way we can actually make further progress was to bring the business in. But for this particular one, the business was all bought in and sold up. They were on the table, they're chomping at the bit, they're really keen. So here it is, we're in January, we're kicking off, we've got a team, I'm there, I'm providing sort of technical coaching, I sort of do a lot of TDD, pairing, patterns, sort of craftsmanship, clean code. That's the sort of thing I can work with teams to do. And we sort of had a whole set of other coaches, a few sort of paid consultants. We had another internal team, mainly sort of the background of lean specialists, but like they were able to help out as well, and effectively pulling us all in. So this is the way these things go. Get the team, it's all looking great and fine and dandy, and you think, this is so exciting. I can see the way that we're going to sort of really change the organisation. It's finally great. But of course, things start to go a bit problematic. So we started setting actual goals, and this is where the business folks and the technical folks started to slightly clash heads, because what they thought was a really aligned group of things. We had a vision, this is what we want to achieve. Well, no, they couldn't quite agree. Like, we didn't, and it so happened that we were both top of the house people, but different departments, so like they start to disagree. And that always takes time and energy. Like we can sort of help some of the ideas about just really a direct approach, but at the same time, like it sort of saps energy as well. And then we lost a few of them. One guy got transferred off, the other guy got seconded to a different team, and suddenly our very high level cover, which was really sort of giving a lot of energy and impetus, had disappeared. So that's where we had the remaining managers going, what are you doing? So can you explain to me what value you're providing? And so this is the phrase, like, look, we've got some really urgent delivery to do. Could you mind just stop distracting everyone? And so that was my exit to leave. So depends on which part in your career. Like, that might be a common story. Like I was going in there as a sort of a technical coach. You might have been involved on the other side, where maybe someone has brought in some consultants to say, we're going to help you improve, which may or may not work. But still, like there's a whole lot of things here. But what I wanted to use this was really just an illustration of what it is that the problem is. Like we wanted to change. We was trying to fix things up, but things didn't work, and like the whole set of practice and patterns that we were trying to actually achieve just fell apart. And that is something that we can sort of put under the guise of culture. Like, what is it that we were doing, and pretty much how we interact and stuff. So, so what we can do is just use that story as sort of a way of actually examining what the culture is. Like, that's what you see in a big bank, and there are a whole set of internal forces involved. So what we're going to do is sort of drill in sort of, why did it fail? Well, the answer is change is hard. Like, it's extremely hard, and you never actually quite realise what it is that you're trying to achieve, and you think it's obvious, I understand it, we can do the next thing. I was at a talk by Alistair Coburn last year, and he had some really interesting stats about like this sort of this thing, like what it is with a transformation. Like someone had actually asked the question, so how do you get a large organisation to change culture? So he had to ponder, and he thought for a bit, and he says, never happened, haven't heard any stories. So from his perspective, when you asked him, how do you change an organisation, he said you can't. But when pinned down, he did sort of go into a bit more detail. He gave the story of Borland. So Borland at the time, this is mid-2000s, They were a fairly well-established company, fairly old for an IT company anyway, but they had an office, and they were showing Alistair around, and he was looking at it and said, wow, this is incredible. You guys are really well set up here. I can see that you're really sort of following the practices. This is not what I expected from you guys, from what I heard. How did you do it? And their answer was, we set up a new office and we only let in the people in with the right mindset. So yeah, it was, he'd been to other offices where they'd asked the same question. He said, what can we do? He'd look around, see the clean desks, sort of people sitting in cubicles, no interactions. Like, there was no learning going on. There was no sort of collective shared information, that sort of stuff. There was no books and desks, and the answer was, well, you've hired the wrong people. That's sort of his one story. But the other one, more hopeful to my mind, was his talk about Real Estate Australia, which sort of 7 years ago was, it's a small company in Australia, strangely enough, about 200 people, but what they'd had, it was a guy come at the top, ex-thought worker, came into CTO, and he'd pretty much started giving power down. So every time they come up to him and say, "What can we do this?" and say yes, and pretty much said yes all the way. But over time, like, suddenly there was a sort of a change in the way that organisation worked, just by people starting to realise that they could do stuff. But that was, in a way, the unlocking from the top. So that's, once again, like, just another sort of more of an expression that change is hard, but there are sort of strategies, patterns, and the rest of this talk is going to touch upon a few things that are allowed. So I want to touch upon this. So the secret to successful change is, I'll get back to it in a minute. So we've got a few, yeah, we'll touch upon that. But so it's simple to explain, but it helps to actually sort of cover some material. So what is culture? So I have been, as you say, involved in sort of trying to influence people, trying to teach them. And this year I actually sort of picked up a new course on Coursera. It's called Culture-Driven Team Building. It's awesome, and I learned a few bit, and I'll put some of the stuff on the slides here. But so sort of what is culture? So this is one of the definitions I heard. So it's whatever people learn from other people and transmit. So especially by interaction. So when it comes down to it, every time we talk to each other, every time we work together, every time we grab a coffee, we're doing something, we're interacting. Every time we walk past someone in the hall, maybe we're ignoring them or talking or smiling. Like, this is all interactions. This is all part of the way we work together and actually sit with each other. So there's things that we explicitly do. We have meetings, we greet in a certain way, g'day or hi or whatever you say, and you have things like embodied culture, so things we don't even need to think about, like just probably where we sit, how we got to the office from our home each morning. We don't necessarily plan it out. We just, oh, I'm at home now. You didn't really plan that out, but you set your goal and you just went there. But they also have a whole lot of other things called the habitus. And the habitus is just, so the habits acquired as part of the culture that we're in. And that might be things like we have a stand-up at 9 o'clock every day or 12 o'clock or whatever time it is. The stand-up follows a certain pattern, or maybe you're doing something else. But these are the things that we don't necessarily think about, not necessarily consciously. And when people don't follow the patterns we expect, that's when we start to think, oh, that's strange, or that's weird, and you notice. So culture is really sort of defined by the bits that surprise you. If it's not surprising, it's probably part of your culture. If it is surprising, you've probably come to some sort of culture clash. Okay, so let's drill a bit further in. There are 4 forces of culture. Now, I guess cultural transmission, really, in the end. So first, there's inertia. So it's the same as the law of motion. Things tend to stay in motion. or things tend to stay at rest. So if some habit or some behavior is happening now, you'll tend to see it happening in the future. And the classic story I heard in this one was the roast beef story. Like sort of an anthropologist was watching a woman and she was cooking dinner and she cut the ends of the meat, put it in the oven. He said, "Why did you cut the ends of the meat?" And she goes, "My mother always did it, I don't know why." So the researcher went and asked the mother, "So why do you do that? Why do you cut the ends of the meat?" "I don't know, my mother always did it as well." So the researcher goes to the grandmother, and the question was, "Why do you do that?" She says, "Oh, I had a small pan, had to cut it to fit it in there." So there was a reason there, but like the original reason why it was there got lost. And you'll see these sorts of things in all the companies. Like they have various ways of doing stuff, various rituals, various meetings, various ways of doing budgeting or whatever it is, yeah. But it's just the way they do it. Not necessarily understanding why they do it, but it's there. So the next force is entropic, random change. So things happen. Sometimes someone new comes in or some external event happens. Maybe the train strike today. You have to change what you do, and suddenly you find, we didn't have that stand up at this time, and it seemed we didn't really need it. And so maybe you do something different for some random reason, and what you do in relation to that can either benefit or hurt you, or do nothing really. Anyway, this is a force against inertia. Things change. Inertia says things stay the same. Entropic force says things change. And you can actually see that if you think about accent or language even. Like the English language or any language over hundreds of years gradually changes. And that's an example of what that is. Now, this one's interesting. Reflective force. So the metacultural. This is explicit culture about culture. So you can make your rules. This is rules, effectively. I have a policy. This company has a policy. We govern our projects in this way. We set up these things. We have to have sign-off for a certain level of budget and stuff. And that is the whole set of, these are the rules. Maybe the laws of the road. Do you drive on the left or the right? These are things that you can actually look at and think of. Okay, you can probably find it written down. But you can also have someone senior or someone in control change the rules. And they can decide that we're going to change the way we do budgets, or we're going to change the way we plan our projects out, or whatever it is. But you can actually have someone senior, or even whoever, someone actually lower down, if you're in a very high hierarchy. They can actually say, let's think about this, let's change the rules. And the last one to touch upon is the force of interest. And this is probably the final one, which can flow either way. But do people care? And I'm talking to a room full of craftsmen people here. So I guess you have a certain level of passion and interest in a certain set of topics, probably around clean code and professionalism and sort of the things that mark out what a craftsman is. Now that is one thing you're interested. Perhaps the accounting guys have a whole different set of interests. And so, and part of it really is thinking about, can you move these things in blocks? Can you get people aligned in the same way? And then suddenly the force of interest can be incredibly powerful. So let's put all those things together. How does these forces work? You have a current culture. Perhaps you want to change it to a different culture. So what happens there? Well, you've got inertia. That's a force pushing against the change. If you try and make a change, it's going to try and stop it. Inertia will sort of try and halt the change. Entropy, there's forces putting you in probably any random direction, probably not the way you wanted. Sometimes it will, and in those cases where the entropic force is making a cultural change which you like, you can try and amplify it. Okay, through metaculture probably. Like you can say, here's a new rule. A metaculture can actually point either way, depending upon who's wanting the change and who's in charge type thing. And finding the force of interest. So all those forces, they combine in different ways. And this is really part of the key of understanding what is the secret to a successful cultural change. These things interact. If you can align them in a way that influences and effectively supports each other, you can actually get something. So there it is, the secret of successful cultural change. So the new culture must appear to grow organically out of the old culture. It's a fairly pithy saying, and this is probably the most insightful thing I got out of the course I did this year. But understanding and making use of it is actually really hard, because and just because you know that, it doesn't mean that you can actually sort of control all the bits and pieces, but you can actually sort of have a model there I've just given you to think about what we can do to support it. So with that, let's touch upon some various different strategies that we can use to actually work with this. So let's start with a quote. So there it is. Culture eats strategy for lunch. So maybe you plan to do something. Maybe you want to make a change. Culture is going to sort of, well, unless you're thinking about the various forces, inertia is the big one. Like it will stop you. So this is why I chose this picture, by the way. Culture is going to smash on your strategy unless you are really planning to work with it. Like perhaps you'd probably prefer to do that instead. But yeah, how do you surf the wave? Or I love this one. Just why not? Maybe culture will give you a cookie. Okay, let's drill into some various different scenarios. One thing is, if you want to if you have a certain culture that you like to do, you can actually just start a new company and set the culture as you want. Done. There's no forces to consider. It's the simplest model that you can get to. What you really then have to consider is sort of entropy. Like it's going to start to drift. So it's the sort of thing that you probably want to ponder about at some stage. Like what is our way of working? Perhaps codify it. Set up some metacultural rules that will actually start to set inertia in place. And inertia is interesting because it can be good or bad. A story I heard last week was the very powerful phrase, that's not the way we do it. And that could either be very positive or really negative, depending on your point of view. Like, for example, you really want to make a change, perhaps you want to sort of have some more time for training or sort of carters and stuff, and if someone says, you ask for permission and says, hey, let's set up a day for carters and training stuff, and they say, we don't do that here. So that's sort of the force of inertia in action. But at the same time, perhaps someone is coming in and doing something you don't like. Perhaps they're saying, oh, we need to set up a hell of a lot of planning and really big upfront design, and you say, oh, that's not the way we do it here. So depending which way you spell it, like the inertial thing can happen. But for a new company set up there, certainly your current culture is probably the one you want because you have control. There's no inertia, and you can actually then sort of help it progress forward. Now let's try a different scenario, and so this is the one that my story at the start of this talk was about. So actually, it was actually top-down change as well at the start, but our top cover meant missing. So there it is. We are trying to make a cultural change. We have coaches in. We are trying to change our policies and procedures and the way we do things. We had a lot of interest. Like there's sort of a lot of developers. They're keen to sort of pick this stuff up. But at the same time, those developers were being hit over the head with holy stuff. We've got stuff to do. We've got plans. You've got to hit the schedule. So there's a whole lot of stuff there. And then there's the the rules, which are sort of saying, that's not the way we do it here as well. Like we have this policy, and this this policy says in quite written rules, and we're not willing to change it right now. And part of that is the long and often painful conversation to say, well, I don't think this policy is fit for purpose or anything like that. And then you can change the rules, but it depends on how much energy you have. And a lot of people will find it much easier just to do that. Let's start up a new company. If you have the option, or join one that actually has your major one. But this is sort of part of the, I guess, the thought about, like, do you change where you are, or you give up and go somewhere else? And for many cases, fighting the current one, the inertia and the rules of the current setup is too hard, and that's fine. But just sort of knowing what the options are and seeing opportunities where you think you can jump in there. Sort of a few ways that you can sort of influence that. So one of the biggest powerful things is community alignment. And so this is, I think, is from the craftsmanship community, like this is one of our big strengths. We can get a huge force of interest like involved, and depending where you are, like speaking to a few different people over the last few days, like some people work in companies which like they're really sort of aligned with the values that we deal. They're small and they're nimble, they can do it. Other people are just, they're sort of more of a lone voice. They're just sort of sitting on their own there. They're reading the stuff, they're interested, but it's hard to actually sort of pull people in. So this is where, like, you can start to think about, well, what can I do internally? Like, well, you can actually just start your own communities. Find out people who share your interests, pull them together. The phrase I'd probably use is teams. Like, get like-minded people together. Like, this is aligning of forces. This is getting the people who are interested and keen to actually come on and to get together, make the voice louder. So that is the whole thing there of actually getting that group in. A group of sort of very keen people coming to the right spot, making a louder voice. So that's sort of raising the force of interest, making that a stronger force. And there's a few other ones you can sort of look at there. I've got notes here, so Spotify model, like squads, tribes, chapter skills, like there's really sort of different ways of organising communities. And some of them, they don't need management support, you just go and do them. Lunches, brown bags, practice carters, and you can eventually, if you can actually sort of find some time there, you can actually sort of pull more people in and get some more interest around that. So part of it is actually sort of from the aspects of the actual technical and craftsmanship people working, actually delivering software, form communities, make the voice louder. The one I'd throw in is reframing. Now, this is trying to expand the force of interest vertically, and that brings in a whole lot of other points there. Now, this is actually I saw Josh Karowski wrote about last month. It was a really good article. But technical practices are business concerns. So that is, don't call them technical practices. And this is starting to think about our messaging, the way we communicate, the way we talk. Like among developers and technical people, like we tend to use our own jargon, which gets lost. So if you're starting to say, yeah, we're doing a CD deployment and we'll sort of compile and various different stage environments, or whatever, you're going to lose some people who don't necessarily live in that stuff day to day. But you can reframe things in terms they understand. So things like clean code. Like, this is giving us optionality. The business would love a chance to actually have different options in the future. And what they can do is know that because we can actually maintain our speed into the future, we can continue delivering at space and quality without slowing down. That's that valuable thing. We can sell it that way. Continuous integration is reducing risk. Like, what is it we're trying to do? Like, well, It's not that we are wasting time integrating every time. We are avoiding the huge, big merge attack, which happens if you keep a bit of code away for a week or a month and then try and merge in the branch. And that will take hours, days, or I've heard of cases up to 6 months. One when someone had done a very large merge and broke everything. So stuff like that's cost. So we want to reduce that risk. And you can talk in those terms. The last one I sort of had here was continuous delivery is reducing risk. Of course, effectively you are trying to close the feedback loop. Do we know what we want to build? Maybe, maybe not. Let's try. Let's experiment. Put it in front of someone who can use it and see if they like it. And that's a really valuable thing for the business, because that stops us building the wrong thing. And if you've ever been involved in a large project which was never used, I remember we started measuring metrics once of when was the first time from deploy to first use. And I remember a feature which the business folks had declared was utterly urgent, had to be there right now. We worked a weekend. It wasn't used for 4 months, and so so that would have been a good thing to have known, that it really wasn't the highest stuff. It wasn't high priority, but someone had probably, for whatever reason, thought it was, but weren't able to back that up. Okay, so there's a reframing. Let's think about different ways of attaching the force of interest, and that comes down to business alignment. So what I want to talk about here is sort of really the way we talk with the business. So once again, trying to actually make sure that what we're doing is in line with what the business understands, what they believe they want. So I've got three different things I want to sort of touch upon here and that one. So the first one, I love this technique, impact mapping. Gojko Adzek has sort of published a book on it a while back, but this is the way I tend to approach any discussion with the business these days. So what is it you're trying to do? And you don't talk about the individual technical tasks you're doing. You really talk to them in their language about what their goals are. What are they trying to achieve? Like, what's their strategy? And then we can start to drill down into the various different ways they might do that. Well, which market segment, which actor, which people are you going to try and achieve this goal through? Like, and this one is they're talking about growing mobile advertising, and then the super fans with mobile devices. So, okay, you can identify someone, and then you can work out what measurable thing. You can always put metrics on all of these things. What is it that we want them to change about what they're doing? And then we can actually attach metrics. Then we can measure it. We can see if we can have a hypothesis and see if the changes we make actually make any nudge on the needle at all. And then we can start to drill down to all the technical bits and pieces that will implement and deliver that feature. But the interesting thing in there is we can always see why we're doing something. I used to have a CTO who would walk around a random developer and just hand in the back says, "So what are you doing?" And they'd say, "Oh, I'm validating an input field." "Why are you doing that?" "Well, it's on my Jira board." "Oh, well, why is that?" And like, he was using the 5 whys techniques just to try and walk up the reasoning. Do they understand the reason why they're doing the work? If they don't, why don't we just stop it? Because it doesn't sound like it's a valuable thing. So there's always a reason why we do stuff. But getting the technology aligned with what the business is doing, like this, really, really changes the trust and the understanding and the communication between us. They want to have roadmaps, yes. More of a professionalism thing here. Business want to plan. I don't actually really have much to say about this one. The way you do that is sort of up to you, really. But if the business is doing roadmaps without technical input or the craftsmanship, there's a problem there, and vice versa. Like, this is a source and a location of interaction and really collaboration. It's something, sometimes I see roadmaps are delivered from on high, and so we must hit this, and we know it's not feasible. And the last sort of business alignment thing I talk about is lean and system thing. This is a quick talk. These topics we can actually drill into for hours. I'm not going to even touch upon now, but this one is sort of one of my favourites, is really trying to get the business to step back and think about what it is that we're doing here. So I've actually got, this is a representation I've done of a value stream. So a value stream is something happens, we do a heap of steps, and hopefully there's some value at the end of it. What the value is, I don't know, but this is sort of like an operational value stream where we have people probably doing stuff. They may be interacting with IT systems, so we have an IT value stream at the bottom there, injecting changes which hopefully help the business realise their goals. Now, this is a really useful thing because, well, here's what I did once. Well, I did this quite a few times, which is just visualise it. Put on sticky notes, put on a wall, and suddenly you can start to have a conversation about all these different technical steps you do. So I think I had about, it was over 100, probably nearly 200 individual steps in our process. So this is a bank, they love their process, and part of our thing was to try and sort of get them to sort of cut down, and just by visualising this sort of stuff and getting them to talk about in terms of what value does this step doing, but then you can start to see the larger end-to-end optimisations that you might think about. Sticking at a wall then suddenly becomes visible, and visualisation is key, and that's one of the big things of the lean thing, which I really, really like. Okay, so I've talked so far about the various different sort of aspects of working in teams and communities. I talked about business alignment. I wanted to sort of touch it now upon learning. So this is one of the big themes of my talk, and part of it is actually being able to actually elevate learning really to the elevate learning to the highest level goal of the company. Like, if the company isn't really willing to say that, like, that's really a huge big conflict with the craftsmanship ethos, and pretty much any of the higher level stuff we should be looking at there. So one of the best companies I worked at, that was at one of their very high level goals, and they said, this is what we are, this is our value, is we value learning, top one, and it was an awesome place to work. So at that level, like making sure that it's a valued part of the culture and it's explicit is probably the change. And this may be the difference between whether you think you can adjust the current culture or you probably want to make an exit. Like, if they're willing to sort of look at this one, you have to think about if you can actually work through the various forces. And the last major point I wanted to touch upon was communication. And this is really the heart of everything. And we think we're actually quite good at that. Like most people, like, we are awesome. We can talk, we say words, and people will nod, and we've communicated. So good job, us. But you guys just really got to have a look at the list of cognitive biases on Wikipedia. And this is really just a whole, just a rat's nest of various different things which your brain very consistently and does wrong and makes the mistakes it makes all the time. So this has a whole lot of downstream effects that you need to really, well, if you're not aware of them, you sort of completely miss out, and you start to realise that you are, well, you don't realise, that's the whole thing. Like the Dunning-Kruger effect is in there somewhere, like among all the 200 or 300 or so ones on there, and there's, even if you do know the biases, there's the bias, like, it'll get you whichever way you want. Like, so there's all sorts of ways which you can be tricked up. So part of the effort of communication really involves avoiding bias. So here's my tips. If you're going to extend your lives, like, once again, I'm really just touching upon whole big themes of knowledge here. Sorry. Clean language. It's a huge change the way you talk. If you can hear that one, NVC, nonviolent communication, between those two, like they are really, really useful things to learn. Like I'd probably say NVC has really changed a lot of the ways that I listen to people and I approach them and sort of speak to them as well. Like there's a whole set of techniques about just exactly understanding people's intent and so on. Now the 8 behaviours, like this is all another thing, I'll give a whole other talk in this one as well, but it's a set of behaviours which you can use to actually pretty much try and avoid a lot of the biases that plague us. And so I'm not going to put them all up here, but pretty much a lot of them involves in trying to make yourself transparent. Expose your thought processes, because one of our biases is that way people understand what I'm doing. I understand you, you understand me. It's clear what I'm thinking. It's not. And it's learning to expose that consistently and coherently is part of the benefit of sort of looking at those ones. So there's a whole book on that one, but there's also a few websites as well. Running out of time. What have I got here? Oh yeah. Good book recommendation there. So this will touch upon a lot of those ones. So I'm suggesting how do we change culture and blah, blah, blah. Here's a whole set of guidelines there. This one doesn't necessarily touch upon the various sort of cultural forces I talked about. But with that lens, you can actually start to see, like, where does it fit? Like, is it, which force does it actually pull in with? So that's sort of pretty much the end of my talk now. Like, I'm sort of saying, what I've sort of tried to suggest is that if you're looking to change, like alignment of the cultural forces, so that is you have inertia, you need to minimize that or avoid it. You have interest, you need to maximize that if you're trying to get it. You can do that through community forming, and you can also do it through business alignment, because that can really sort of help pull in the businesses, the force business. It also pulls in the metacultural force. If you can get the people making rules excited and interested in what you're doing, things become much easier. And then I have suggested various communication strategies will help you with your alignment and with your learning. So, done. Are there any questions? Stunned silence. There's one. Yeah.
I find the notion of non-violent communication quite interesting. And do you just take that as a given, or do you have training?
You can get training. I haven't actually taken it myself, but okay, quickly detailed. So, what you're trying to do with non-violent communication is pretty much trying to avoid violent communication. Well, first actually helps to define what violent communication is, and that's pretty much, you can obviously say if I'm swearing at you, that's probably violent, but other aspects are things like, if I'm judging you, that was a terrible thing you did, or that was awful, why did you do that? Like, those are challenges, those are judgments, and that is considered sort of in Rosenberg's model, violent communication. So what Rosenberg has suggested you do instead is focus on pretty much 4 steps, which is observations. Well, you just spilt. I saw you just spill hot coffee all over me. That hurt me, and it made me feel sort of annoyed that you've done it. So you follow a fairly step. So it's observations, it's feelings, it's a need and a request. So I need you to be more careful in the future. Can you please hold your whatever it is you want you to do? But that's a whole set of steps there. But you can actually try and think about their interactions. The interesting thing about non-violent communication is it changes the conversation from judgment, the way what I think about you. Sorry about you. But to how you make me feel, and you can't really challenge that. Like you can't say, no, I don't make you feel like that, because you don't know. This is my head. But it then changes the whole tenor of the conversation. So, and that is a huge trust building exercise. And once you can actually sort of change the tenor, like suddenly you can have extra ways of collaborating and understanding, and then sort of leveling up the way you work together. Yes?
Just wanted to hear if you had any strategies. So you talked about reframing, you talked about business alignment. I wanted to hear if you had any strategies for when the incentives are against your change. For example, business might be better incentivized by, or might literally be incentivized by short-term goals. Sure, we could invest in continuous delivery or getting tests, but if I get 4 features out, this quarter, then I'll get a bigger bonus instead of 3 features. That's very challenging to do alignment when they're directly contradictory.
Yes. I can't actually say much more than that. Yes, it is. If you can point that out and saying your short-term goals are at odds with our long-term goals, like they're hurting us in the long term, and you can sort of start raising the discussion about that. But obviously, whoever set that short-term goal, like what were their reasons and stuff, and sometimes there are perverse incentives. You can expose them, you can talk about them, and see if you get rid of them. But while the incentives are there, the behaviours will probably not improve. So,
thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.